And so I want to acknowledge that where I am in the Greater Toronto Area, and where many of us are, I want to acknowledge that we are walking upon the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe, the Wendusane, the Wendat, and the Huron and Indigenous peoples. The Greater Toronto Area is now home to many diverse nations, Inuit and Métis people, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live in this community. And so you might be asking why start with a land acknowledgement? If you're part of Michael's Havra service, you've heard that before. And so there's a couple of reasons. One reason is I think it's really important. I think it's important to acknowledge people who were here before us in the land that we are on. It's also very much connected to what we're doing tonight because we're cooking. And obviously we're cooking with food that comes from the soil. And more so, the particular recipes that we're doing tonight. So if you had a chance to look at the recipes beforehand, you'll see that we are making calabacitas con elote, or zucchini with corn. We are making enfrijoladas, which doesn't really translate, but it's beans and tortillas wrapped together. And we are making arroz verde, or green rice. And for some of you might have made a connection already that we are cooking with beans, corn, and squash, zucchini being a variation in the squash family. And you might have made the connection that that's very much connected to the three sisters, which was a traditional way of farming of the Iroquois people and a lot of other Indigenous peoples as well. And so in doing a little bit of research, I actually learned, very interestingly and very apropos for this evening, that traditional way of farming and of having those three crops together actually has its roots in Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica is what we now call Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and parts of Costa Rica. And so the way that the people who were in this land before us, the way they harvested their food comes from the way that people who lived in Mexico, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, how they cultivated their food. And what's really interesting, as I did a bit more research, is that actually is very much the way of farming and food cultivation that Indigenous people had across North America. The varieties differed, right? So it's different types of beans, it's different types of squash. Here it was winter squash. In Mexico, it's like a zucchini or patty pan squash, but the traditions are very similar. So that's a bit of introduction as to what we're doing. And I want to start, I'm going to bring you over here. We're going to start by making the enfrijoladas. And so I did do a little bit of prep beforehand so that, we wouldn't have to wait till cook beans. So I cooked the black beans before, and I cooked them very much the way that we would cook them in Mexico, which is with a tomato, and you can see there's still bits of tomato in here, and with an onion. So you just take black beans, tomato, and an onion and cook them as you normally would cook beans. I made ours in our Instapot, which you'll hear me talk about a lot tonight and use a lot. I don't work for them. I don't get paid by them. There's no commission, but I love it. And you'll see how effective it is at cooking. So I'm going to go on mute while I puree, because nobody needs to hear the sound of the blender, but I'll show you, I'll keep the camera on so you can see what thickness to get.
Sylvia, we have a question. What did your mother use before the age of immersion blenders to get the puree?
So there's an answer in the chat from Moises and Rishona Moshinsky, whose children and grandchildren belong to Beth David. And it's a molcajete, which is like a stone. They would have used a blend, right? So my mom would have used a blender versus the immersion blender. And before that, it would have been by hand.
And we have another question. How did you, sorry, just lost the question. How did you cook the black beans with the tomato and onion in the Instapot?
Great question. So this is why I love the Instapot. I rinse the beans straight from the bag, dry, put them in the Instapot with an onion that I cut in half, a tomato that I cut in half, put a good amount of water, probably about that much more water than beans. And I set the timer to 30 minutes and I walked away.
So Sylvia, I just wanted to add to that. It's Carla here.
Hey, Carla.
Hi. So those of us who don't have an Instapot, would you suggest soaking it overnight in baking soda so that otherwise it'll take you like days until the beans are ready?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would, if I wasn't cooking them in the Instapot, I would have soaked them the night before. So I would have soaked them last night and then cooked them today, and they take a while to cook. So I'm pouring the beans into the pan. Okay. And this is when I said in the instructions for the recipe of the type of pan, you want a pan that's deep enough that you have a good pool of beans, like you can see here, but not super deep because we're going to be dipping the tortillas in and out. Okay. And now I need a minute to do a very quick scene change because I need the Instapot back in a minute to make the rice. So let me just ask the magical hands behind the scenes to wash the pot for me. And you'll need to put the extra beans in here now. Okay. So I'm going to start making.
Yeah. Sorry, we have another question.
Great.
Can you use cooked black beans from a can instead?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the only thing I would do is rinse them first, because when you use them from a can, there's like a sliminess to it. Yeah. So I would rinse them and then puree them. And this is what you want in the puree. So it's a consistency that is, grab a spoon. So it has to be somewhat thick, but you still need it to pour, if you can see that.
And is that close enough to like a refried bean? Will that become like a refried bean dish?
No, it stays more liquid than that because you'll see why in a second. Let me just move the mic that I had set up there because I'm not using it. So you'll see the next piece of the recipe. So what you want to do is get a small frying pan, and I'm using a relatively small one on purpose, and you put enough oil at the bottom just to cover at the bottom. And you want to do medium heat on both the beans and the oil. And so the enfrijoladas was absolutely the comfort food of choice at my grandmother Renee's house. So if you know my daughter Renee, that's who her namesake, my mom, Regina's mom, Renee. And we used to have these all the time. And I have such fond memories of eating these at her house. And so basically how it works is you're gonna take a tortilla, you put it in the oil, and I'll show you in a sec as soon as it heats up, and then you dredge it through the beans. Now a word about the tortillas. So these are the ones that I'm using. Okay, the brand is La Tortilla Factory, and they are half whole wheat, half corn. The traditional tortillas you would use in Mexico that we grew up with in Mexico are all corn, but they're not as easy to find here, and there aren't any with a hechsher. So I use these instead. They're pretty good. So I can, and Cora, I can send out the information on them. And you can see that I wrote "do not use" for Beth David to make sure that nobody in my house ate them before tonight, leaving me with nothing to cook. Not that that ever happens with 3 kids at home. The other thing you want to do actually is season the beans with some salt and pepper, and that's totally to taste. So if you like saltier food, put more. If you like spicier food, put more. But you don't want to do that while the beans cook. You want to do it after. Was there another question that came through? I saw something.
Yeah, it said, does anyone know if you can get kosher corn tortillas in Toronto? But I think you already answered it, Sylvia, because you haven't been able to find your corn tortillas that are kosher.
Not with a hechsher. So, you know, if people are comfortable with kosher by ingredient, there are, but if it's a hechsher, there isn't.
Yeah.
So the oil is starting to get warm, right? And it's like you would with any oil, you can sort of feel it getting warm. I'm going to not use that one because it curled up from being outside in the air. And you basically just want to put the tortilla in and heat it through both sides so that it folds easily. So you can see this one's not quite ready yet. The oil might not have been quite hot enough. So when if you can see with this one, the one that's not cooked, it's a bit stiff and you want it to be soft. You can see how this one is getting to be much softer. And so then what you do, and there's no way of avoiding mess when you do this, so you just have to clean later. You dip it in to the pan with the beans. And this is why you need the bean consistency, that, you know, that it's sort of liquid enough. So not quite like, you know, Carla, to your question about refried beans, if you did this with refried beans, they wouldn't really, they're not liquid enough to coat. So with this, you coat it, and then the tricky part is you fold it over itself. And then you can either serve this directly onto the plate. So if you're just, you know, making a small amount for a couple of people, you would plate immediately. Or I have a glass dish, and I'm just going to stack them up in a glass dish. So
would you bake them? Okay, like for example, if you want to do it ahead of time, can you do it ahead of time and bake them when you're going to actually serve them, or no?
Good question. They dry up quite quickly. So if you are going to make them ahead of time, you can make them like a half hour ahead of time, right? But you wouldn't make it the day before because it doesn't reheat particularly well. But what you can, if you are going to do that, and you'll see me do this in a minute, because this is going to be our dinner in a while, is you water down the beans a little bit more, and then you pour some of the bean sauce on top. And the reason you water them down is so they don't dry out, which is something else actually I'll mention. You would have seen me do this while I was pureeing the beans. They were too thick, so I just kept adding water straight from the top. So I think you probably saw that in the video. And so you can't, the way the camera is set up, you can't see how I'm stacking them up, but I'm putting them next to each other, not on top of each other. Because if you put them on top of each other, they'll start to sort of melt together. They'll still taste the same and they'll still be really good, but you won't get the sort of the individual portion.
Sylvia, does this dish change from different parts of Mexico, or is it the same no matter where you go?
That's a really good question. So enfrijoladas are largely the same. And I'm actually not, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure of what region of Mexico they originate from. I don't know if the Moshinskis or if my mom or my aunt know that. And if you do, please chime in. Mexican cuisine, though, does vary very significantly from region to region within the country. And I don't know where enfrijoladas are from.
So do you find that cuisine where you guys are from, is it more spicy? Is it more savory? Is it sweeter?
So we're from Mexico City, and it tends to be spicy. Lots of things based with, rice and beans are very much staples. And then it also, it's also sort of influenced by, all the same things that food is influenced by here. So where your family's from, you'll eat, different traditional foods from your family as well. Food from the north of Mexico, sort of closer to the US border, is more meat-based. Mole, which is really, sort of a very, it means it's like a sauce. There are tons of varieties. Every part of Mexico has its different one. You can see the oil is getting quite hot now, so I keep turning it down, but you can see how soft the tortillas get.
And I can see you're using olive oil.
Yes.
So is it traditionally olive oil or?
No, traditionally it's a good hi Carla. Traditionally it would have been corn oil. My corn oil is in a really, really big vat that I didn't really want to have out on the stove. So I use olive oil. Tradition is the more common one in Mexico is corn oil for sure. But it's just, it's for a little bit. So you can use whatever oil you have on hand. So I'm going to pause making these now because I want to move on to making the other things to make sure we have enough time. So I'm just going to turn down the heat, and I'll show you what it looks like in the pan. So if you were going to make them ahead and bake them, what you want to do is take some of the beans and cover it. And if it's thick, you'd want to water down the beans a little bit more than they're watered down here. I'm not going to do that because I'll use these again a little bit later. Not for the cooking demo, but just to feed us as a family. So that's sort of what it would look like. And so for now, I'm just going to put them in the oven so they stay hot.
And can you put cheese on them, Sylvia?
Yeah, so to serve, here I can show you. So to serve, you wouldn't put cheese on them now because you put the cheese on at the end. So at the end, when it's time to serve, you would drizzle some sour cream, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later because it's not really sour cream in Mexico. Cheese, and there's lots of different varieties. This is just shredded mozzarella, lettuce, radishes, and sliced avocado. So I will come back to that in a minute because I want to get to the other dishes so we have enough time to make everything. So hang tight for 1 sec while I get some foil.
So Sue Stein, I just want to tell everybody she's sharing something with us. Originally created in the state of Osaka. Is it Osaka? Is that how you pronounce it?
Oaxaca.
Oaxaca. It was its origins from pre-Columbian times. Here you go. Thank you, Sue.
And was that Sue Stein, my Aunt Cookie?
Is it?
I think it is. It is. Unless there's two Sue Steins.
Yes, it's your aunt.
So that's my Aunt Cookie, who is an absolutely fabulous cook, who is joining us from Arizona.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Do you call her Tia?
No, I just call her Cookie, which is her name.
Gotcha.
Okay, so I'm gonna start doing the rice now. And this is where you're gonna see another reason why I really like using our Instapot, because I'm gonna make everything directly in here. But first I need to puree. Sorry, I'm just trying to adjust how the cameras are set up in the kitchen and where I have everything. So I'm gonna just put this down for 1 sec. So the first part of making the green rice is to puree what's going to turn the rice green. And so you can use different things, or traditional pieces is what I'm going to use today. And so I have pre-prepared a couple of things. So I put a little bit of water in the blender already. Then I think it's about half an onion chopped up, maybe it's a quarter of an onion. I have a poblano pepper, and I will show you. So this is a poblano pepper. So in some ways it looks like a big jalapeno, but it is not, and it is not spicy. I found these at Loblaws. Sometimes you luck out and find them, and sometimes you don't. But this is what it looks like. And all you do is you cut it like you would a red pepper or green pepper. You take out the seeds, not that they're spicy, but you just don't want to puree the seeds. And then put it right into the blender. So in the blender is garlic clove, onion, parsley, coriander, and I forgot the lid, which would be a disaster. And I'm going to go on mute again so you don't get the noise. And
Sylvia, is it called salsa verde, or what's the sauce called again?
no, so you would not call this salsa verde. Salsa verde is different.
Okay.
So salsa verde is made with tomatillos, which are a part of the tomato family. They're small and they're green. They are not green tomatoes, though. They're different, and they actually have a skin on the outside.
Mm.
So once it gets quite liquid, as you can see here, then it's ready to go. And so now you'd start to get the rice cooking. And to get the rice cooking, you would do, if you use a rice cooker, use a rice cooker. If you use a pot, you would use a pot. I am going to, in theory, I was going to use my Instapot, but for some reason it's not working. Okay. So you start by sauteing. And hang on one sec. I need a production assistant here. Sam, can you come, mi amor? Can you hold the phone while I cook?
You want me?
No, I think I'm not off mute. Cool. Okay. Start by sauteing in a little bit of oil. Again, I'm using olive oil, but you can use corn oil, vegetable oil, whatever you have. And you put some onion in. as the onion starts to cook, take a minute to heat up.
And Sylvia, do you have a specific rice that you use?
It's a good question, Carla. I just use so honestly, I use what I have at home. More traditional, it's a long grain rice versus the short grain rice. But I've used everything. I've used basmati, I've used instant, whatever I have on hand.
Okay.
And so green rice is, so red rice you've probably seen or had before. It's also very traditional in Mexico, and red rice is fairly common. You'd have it very regularly, and it's basically made, if you want to make it here, you would do half of the liquid, you would use a tomato juice, and then the other half you would use water, or you could do part tomato juice, part salsa, and add a bit more water because the salsa is thicker. Green rice is made using very similar principles, but it is made green through the parsley, coriander, and poblano pepper. So you basically want to cook this. Oh, I turned off my camera. Thank you. So why don't you do the camera work? So you cook until the onion is starting to get translucent, which you can see it starting to get a little bit translucent here. And then you add the garlic. And I feel like I'm in a cooking show by having like all the stuff pre-cut, because
you are so organized. I'm so
any of us cook at home. You know what, Carla? Like, it was the only way I could have possibly done this today.
Oh, you could actually squeeze this in for us. Thank you.
Squeeze it. No, you know what? And it's so funny because initially, so you can really see how it's all starting to cook together. Initially, I thought, okay, I'll go last because I'm so busy right now when we were planning these. And it turns out that now it's even busier than then. So then you add the rice. And you cook it to not really brown it, but you just want to cook it a little bit in the oil. A little bit golden.
So Sylvia, we have a question from Adele, and she's asking, if red rice is every day, when would you serve this rice, the green rice?
Oh, so green rice is more of a special occasion kind of rice. And you would have it as you would have rice. So you could have it with fish. It's really good. With chicken, really with whatever you want. So now you can see the rice has a bit of color to it. Okay. So now you would add the puree.
And I think your other aunt's saying, you are inspiring me to make this rice that I probably haven't made in years.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
So cool.
And so you add whatever amount of water you would normally add, right? So in the Instapot, it's equal parts, but in other times you would do more water than rice, depending on how you cook it. And then you want to add salt. You can also make this with broth, right? So if you want to make it with stock, you could do that too. Although you don't need to, because the green gives it quite a, the puree gives it quite a bit of flavor.
And Sylvia, if you're not using an Instant Pot, is it just a normal pot you would use, the exact same
normal
principles?
pot? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You would cook it the way you would cook rice normally. So you would do, it's been a long time since I cooked rice normally. You would cook it for half an hour, I think. And this is where anybody else can jump in. and correct me because it's been a while since I cooked rice normally, but how you normally would. Exactly the same as you would cook a white rice.
Elaine Lake
Thank
is
you,
saying
Elaine, about 20 minutes. So the rice is set. Can I show them what you're doing? And some of you might recognize Samuel. He is now continuing to make enfrijoladas.
Yay, good for you, Samuel. That's excellent. I've got a question from Lisa and Barry Levine. I think it's just Lisa. And she's saying, is the green liquid included in the liquid amount or separate when you're putting it in the rice? You have to, so basically you had like maybe a 1 cup of green salsa or green sauce.
Yeah, it's separate. So you want, because the puree is quite thick. Okay. So the water would be separate. Okay, so do you want to put yours in here? Sorry, we just have an extra enfrijolada to add to what we have in the oven. Okay, I'm gonna use the stove now. Okay, do you want to make another one? Okay.
So Cheryl has investigated about a corn tortilla for you, Sylvia. And
oh, great.
She says there's a kosher all-corn gluten-free brand called Kipasa sold at Loblaw, Sobeys, and Walmart.
That's great. I haven't seen corn tortillas in a long time.
Maybe it's something new.
That's great. So I'm just wiping down the stove because we got some spillage of the beans. So the third and last dish that I'm going to make is, it's super simple and really traditional. So this is calabacitas con elote. Calabacita is a squash or a squash variety. In Spanish, we don't distinguish between different. It's all calabaza, like a pumpkin is a calabaza. Calabacita is more for zucchini or patty pan squash. So, and for this, so again, you put oil at the bottom of your pan.
Be very generous with the olive oil.
Yeah, because this is a big pan. I'm making a big portion. Okay. Because this will then serve us for the week, but you don't need a ton. You just want it to cover the bottom of the pan. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay.
That's good.
And then, and there's a couple of options here. So once the oil is hot, I'll give it a minute. Then you would add onion and garlic. And you can do jalapeno in here or not, depending on how much spice you like or don't like.
And Sylvia, sort of,
yeah,
the zucchini or the squash that you used, which one's that? Was it winter squash?
No, this is just plain zucchini.
Oh, zucchini. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, this is regular zucchini. Okay. Yeah. Which is what we would use in Mexico.
Okay.
So it's yeah, I diced it beforehand. I figured there was no need for me to use a knife while on camera. Because I don't know if you have this experience, but when you're in Zoom meetings and you're projecting a document and you're typing in front of everybody, you make a lot more mistakes than you normally would. Yeah. And so I just decided there's no need for knife skills. Everybody knows how to chop an onion and mince garlic and dice zucchini. So it was, I prepped all of that. Excellent.
So Sylvia, we have a question from Marcia Moshinsky. Have you ever tried making excuse my pronunciation, calabacitas con queso?
Calabacitas con queso.
Con queso.
I'm now trying to think if I have, or if it's more that I've had it with my mom and my aunt, who are fabulous cooks. So I think you can largely make this recipe, but then you would put cheese on top. But I'm not sure if she's referring to that or a different.
Hola, Silvia.
Hola, Marsha.
I'm thinking that the cheese is all melted in, but I don't know when to add the cheese.
I don't know.
If I find out, I'll let you know.
Okay. So this is where I call a friend and I say, Cookie or Ma.
The Adventures of Cooking Mexican.
Yeah, so Regina is my mom. If you see her name, she would know.
I actually named me so that I am your mom, to remind us all. Marsha, I haven't made calabacitas con queso in a really long time. So I can find out too and let you know. I think it's more in a cream sauce, but I'm always up for a good challenge. Let me find out.
So here, once you get the zucchini going, you cover it. And you cover it for a few minutes so that it starts to sort of releases, because it releases a fair bit of liquid, and so it starts to steam. So while that's happening, I just want to check on the rice, which is still in the pressure cooker. And so what I can do now is get the enfrijoladas out and show you how we would serve them.
Sylvia, the dish you're making, the zucchini dish with the corn and the tomato, is that an everyday dish or is that a special dish as well?
No, it's every day. So enfrijoladas is a total everyday kind of dish. You know, it's something that people consider comfort food, but it's not fancy food or special food. It's special here because we don't make it very often, but in Mexico, it wouldn't have been. And the other thing I was going to mention too, when it comes to enfrijoladas, is the same way that I made them is the way you would make enchiladas. So what you would do with enchiladas or enchiladas, might sound more familiar, is the same thing with the tortilla. You would heat it in one pan, and then you would have another pan with a red sauce or a green sauce, and then just you know, dredge it in.
Okay.
And so, well, the other things are cooking. I can show you.
Yeah, with enchiladas, you don't fill them in?
Yeah. Sorry?
The enchiladas, you don't fill them in with whatever?
No, you wouldn't. So except so it depends. If you want to make this meat, you could put chicken inside, and you could do that with enfrijoladas, or you can or with enchiladas. You could also with enchiladas put cheese inside as you roll them. And enchiladas you can actually make ahead and put them in a dish, like in a glass dish like this, and put them in the oven because the sauce is a lot more liquid. So if you see the enfrijoladas now, you can see that they dried out a little bit, and that's just because I didn't put liquid in the beans to put more sauce on top, because you saw Sam making some. They're going to continue making some more later. So the way you would serve them is you put them on a plate, and you can always add a little bit more beans on top. To make them look pretty. And this is where you would add a bit of shredded cheese. And it's just a little bit as garnish.
And Sylvia, does it matter what kind of cheese are you using? Are you using mozzarella, cheddar?
So anything that's mild.
Okay.
So the traditional cheese you would use in Mexico is a queso fresco, which you may or may not be able to get here, and it wouldn't be halal Israel, so it depends on how kosher you eat your dairy products. So you can use mozzarella that's pretty mild. The difference with the Mexican cheese is that the other one crumbles. So some people would use feta, but if you use feta, it has to be very mild feta.
Sylvia, we can't see how you're filling it in or what you're doing.
Oh, sorry. What camera am I?
There's a plate
Oh, my
over.
camera's frozen. Is this frozen?
No,
it's
it's
not
just hard to,
frozen.
it's
Turn a different
neither
angle.
camera shows, yeah, neither camera shows your counter right now.
Oh, sorry. Of course it doesn't. Sorry. Hang on. You didn't miss anything. Very exciting. I just put cheese on top. And then you would add a little bit of sour cream, and it's just a little bit. And then some radishes. And this is garnish. So if you don't like radishes, don't do it. A little bit of lettuce for some crunch and contrast, and then sliced avocado. And that is what it would look like once it's served. Let me see if there, we can have that angle. And then I can do the avocado.
Sylvia, we have another question from Adele. Is the Jewish community in Mexico more Ashkenazi background or Sephardi?
It's a great question, Adele. Thank you. And it's actually something that I thought I could talk about while I'm cooking. So all I'm doing is just slicing an avocado. And obviously, if you do it this way, be very careful. So it's actually a combination. And I think often people sort of make the association between Mexico and Spain and make the assumption that, Mexican Jews are mostly Sephardi, and we're not. So some of us are, but it's not the majority of the population. So in Mexico, we actually sort of have 3 Jewish communities in Mexico, and it's from where the Jews came from, in the 100 years ago. So there are Árabes or Arab Jews, mostly from Syria, who emigrated to Mexico. There are Sephardi Jews, and so my mom and my Aunt Cookie, who are on the phone, our family comes from Greece and Turkey, and that's where most of the Sephardi Jews in Mexico come from. And then there's the Ashkenazi Jews who came a little bit after the other 2, and come from, Ukraine, Russia, Poland. My father's family comes from there. And until probably the last 20 years, those 3 communities were completely distinct. So different day schools, different shuls. You didn't marry each other. You didn't necessarily socialize with each other. My parents were a bit risque in the late 60s by getting married, because my mom is Sephardi, my dad is Ashkenazi. That was not the norm. That's changed, now it is. But the communities were really very, very, very separate. So here's what the dish looks like once it's done.
And your aunt is also making a recommendation.
Excellent.
She's saying you can also upgrade the enfrijoladas with roasted butternut squash and a little queso cotija on top. Am I saying it right? A little Spanish that I speak.
It's good. It's good. It's close. Okay, so I'm just going to pay a little bit of attention to the zucchini. So can you see at the stove? So now you would add the jalapeno and the corn.
Comments, looks delicious. Thanks, Sharon.
It's so good.
And the corn you use, can it be frozen, canned, straight off the cob? What do you tend to use?
So I use frozen because it's easy, but I have done it off the cob. So I made this for Rosh Hashanah a couple of years ago, and because it's Rosh Hashanah and it's special and it's, fall and the corn is delicious, I actually, did it off the cob. But for today, I use frozen. And I took it out of the freezer last night and I put it in the fridge so that it would, thaw enough for today. And I just put it in directly.
Wonderful. And the tomatoes you're using, are they canned or is it chopped?
No, it's just chopped. The best looking tomatoes they had at the store this week. So they're not the best tomatoes in the world, but they're fine for cooking. The other thing about the Jewish community in Mexico that is really interesting, quite different from Jewish communities in the rest of the world, is that it has a very strong central organization. And so every shul, every day school, the JCC, every Jewish organization is centrally affiliated with a central organization that looks after the community's needs as a whole. And so they do a lot of work with the government. They've done a lot of work to educate around anti-Semitism, Holocaust education. And it actually has made Mexico one of the few countries in the world where anti-Semitism has been on the decrease in the last number of years. And so my uncle on my father's side, my uncle Mauricio, is the executive director of the community. And he has met with every Mexican president in the last probably 20 years since he's had the job. He has met with the Pope every time the Pope comes to Mexico. And so I always used to joke that my Bubby and Zadie were the only Bubby and Zadie who had a picture of the Pope in their house. And it's because they had a picture of my uncle meeting the Pope, because my uncle then is the representative of the Jewish community. And so there is a central voice that represents Jews in Mexico to groups outside of the Jewish community. Certainly not within the Jewish community, but outside. So I'm going to add the tomatoes, which I think you can see in my laptop camera.
Sylvia, we have another question from Fleur Sampson. She's asking, how big are the Jewish communities in Mexico?
So there's about 50,000 Jews in Mexico. The vast majority are in Mexico City. And another interesting piece is it is a very, very tightly knit community. And so more than 95% of the Jewish community in Mexico is affiliated with a Jewish organization, whether that is a school or a shul or the JCC. Everybody, and the Moshinskis who are on the phone, and Marcia and my mom, we can all comment, everybody is connected and affiliated. It's also one of the only countries outside of Israel where intermarriage is not increasing. It is just a very, very tightly knit community. So I think the rice is ready.
Cora, I just answered for you, sorry. Rochelle was saying, will we get the recipes? And everything looks amazing. Thanks, Rochelle. And
I'll post the recipes in the chat. It's a link, so you can go on anytime. Okay. I'll post it in a minute.
Thank you.
So I just went on mute because I'm letting the steam out of the pot, and you don't need to hear the noise of the steam.
Sylvia, I had a question about when the community is so tight knit, what does that look like between the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community, especially in Mexico City?
It's a good question. So, and that's where it's interesting that, anti-Semitism has decreased in Mexico City. And I think that's because there is a central voice that represents the Jewish community. So again, it's my uncle, so I know the stuff firsthand. He has taken the Mexican Archbishop to Auschwitz and to Israel. And he has taken former presidents of Mexico as well. And so there's a really strong, there had been a lot of anti-Semitism. So certainly when my parents grew up, and the Moshinskis on the line could attest to it as well, there was anti-Semitism. That has very much decreased. And it's a very small percentage of the population. Mexico has over 100 million people, and there's 50,000 Jews, but they're well represented with leaders in terms of making sure that anti-Semitism is addressed and not an issue. But there isn't, there's certainly friendships between Jews and non-Jews, but the vast majority of Jewish kids go to day schools, or they would go to other niche private schools. So I think the rice is ready. Yeah. Oh, you can't see it because it's steamed. Hang
on. The Moshinsky said, yes, very good explanation, Sylvia. He's very impressed with you. Sylvia, the zucchini dish, could you make that ahead or is it better fresh?
You can make that ahead.
Okay.
And I did turn off the stove while I was talking because I could tell it was starting to burn a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's what it looks like now.
Beautiful.
And it's pretty much ready to serve. You would add some salt and pepper as you wish, and you can also add coriander at the end of cooking. So, and then I'll show you, it looks so pretty when you add the coriander as a garnish. It just makes it look really pretty. I'm not going to add more coriander because it's still too hot and I don't want it to cook. Okay. Traditionally, the spice you would use is called epazote, but that is very hard to find here in Toronto.
So the spice epazote, what's in the spice? Is it a mixture of spices?
It's an herb. No, it's an herb.
Okay.
It's an herb, and it's an herb that grows. It grows locally in Mexico, and then I would think also over parts of the Southwest in the U.S. as well.
Are you going to be? So I have another question from Lisa. It says, "Is zucchini dish going to be served over the rice, or is it side dish?" How would you serve
yes and
the
yes.
zucchini?
Yeah, you could serve it as a side dish, or you could serve it on its. If you're happy to eat vegetables by themselves, you can eat it by itself. It's quite substantive with the corn. And so the rice, now that it's all cooked, sort of looks like this. So it's a little bit. I can't show you in the pot because there's too much steam coming out still. But it's not like a deep green, it's more speckled.
Mm-hmm.
And can you serve the zucchini over the rice, or are they supposed to be separate?
You could serve it together. So those are the 3 dishes.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank
Sylvia,
you.
For the questions
Beautiful
on the
job.
Jewish community.
Beautiful job. Amazing.
Thank
Thank
you.
so much for sharing that with us.
My pleasure. And
learned-
if you have, if people have more questions, if you're trying the recipes at home and you have a question, feel free to reach out. It's lovely to, I couldn't see you because of the way I have the whole laptop set up. It's a little bit too, that makes it precarious for me to be looking at the screen to see who might be, who's on and who's not. But it was nice to see a few names pop up on the screen.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for joining.
Excellent. Yeah, everyone's thanking you. A mille de gracias. Thank you.
Gracias.
Wonderful. Yes.
Bye.
Thank you. Gracias.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Yes, bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much, Sylvia. If anyone wants to stay on and just say hi to somebody else on the call, go ahead. Sylvia, don't feel the need to stick around, but I always like to leave it open if anybody just wants to chat.
Thank you, Cora. I'm happy to stay if people have questions.
Thank you very much, Silvia. It was great. Sabroso.
Gracias. Un placer de verlos.
Igualmente. Same here. Okay.
It was a pleasure to see you. Thank you for coming.
I'm just smelling the green rice.